Hello everyone, Zellerant here, and today we're going to take a look at Peritya, one of the standard units in Girls Frontline 2. Now, I have not actually acquired her yet in-game, and when I kind of look at her through the information here, looking at her traits and skills, it shows everything as if you've maxed out her fortifications, so I'm going to have to actually look at all her skills on Pridewin. But just know you can actually look at them in-game, but it's showing them completely maxed out with all their dupes and everything, so you'll want to look online to get a better picture of that. Now, when we take a look at like the tier list for her, you'll see that she's fairly low currently on global on the tier list. That's not because she's a bad unit. It's really right now at this point with her is there's really none of the units that she synergizes really well with are out yet. There's some absolutely broken ones that'll be coming out in the future in CN, like Kluke, that she'll work extremely well with. And that's why you actually see in the CN tier list she goes from lower tier to a higher tier, because her value increases as units that synergize with her come out. When we look at her trait, you'll see that she has a support action like most of the other standard units, except that relies on AoE attacks. And so we don't have really anybody that can really trigger that for her, giving her those support actions and taking full advantage of her trait. But let's just go ahead and take a look at it. All right, so we're here on Pridewin here. So first we'll take a look at her passive skill or trait. So it's called Chain Reaction. So when an enemy unit within range takes damage from an allied unit's AoE attack, perform one instance of action support, dealing 50% of attack as AoE physical damage and 1 point of stability damage, as well as gaining 1 point of Confectance Index. So that's the big thing with her on her trait, is she does have action support like her other units, except it requires it to be an AoE attack, and that is very limited in the current state, especially since her AoE is all around her, so you want units that can do attacks on units all around her. So this effect can trigger up to 6 times per turn, and before the attack, every 1 point of leftover mobility before the attack increases the damage by 10% up to a maximum of 30%. And so if she's already moved and has leftover mobility, you can increase her damage. So a big thing with her is you're going to want to kind of get her in place and kind of implant her there, so you don't have you can have some left over to give a big buff to this as your AoE unit comes in and does an AoE attack, and then she kind of finishes them off. And so we have that for the ultimate. So we'll go ahead and take a look at her basic skill now. Basic skill is just like your standard basic skill. Select one enemy target with 8 tiles, deal physical damage 80%. This does the stability damage of 2. Now this one has a longer range than some of your shorter range units of 8, so that's good right there on her basic attack. We have her active skill Fixed Erosion. It's an AoE cleanse. So this one it's an AoE of 3x3, has a cooldown of 2, stability damage of 1, a range of 8. So select one enemy within 8 tiles, dealing AoE corrosion damage equal to 85% attack to the target enemies within a 3x3 area, and cleanses 1 buff. So basically what this is meaning is any tile 8 tiles out from you, you can select to do the attack, and then within a 3x3 grid, it will hit all the enemies within that grid, and if they have a buff, it will cleanse one of them off of the enemies. The next one we have is Domain Suppression. This one is another one with a range of 8, AoE of 1, cooldown 3, stability damage of 3. And so this one select a tile within 8 tiles, so same distance of center, deal AoE physical damage equal to 90% of attack to all enemies within 1 tile of them, so just a 1 tile circle around them. The center, and when it means by tile of the center, it also means it includes the diagonals, so it's a full square around it. It's not just up and down and left and right, it's also the corners of that tile. And pull the 1 tile towards it. For each target hit, reduces the skill cooldown by 1 turn. And so this is one where it's really nice. It has a cooldown of 3. So if you're in a situation where you can hit 3 enemies, you're going to immediately make this skill available again by using it. And then final, we have her ultimate. This is multi-compilation. And so this one has a really high confectance cost of 6 on it, but it is a very large AoE 9x9 grid. Now, it's not going to hit that entire 9x9, but it has got a large area that it covers. Stability damage of 2. So this one deals AoE corrosion damage equal to 100% of attack to all enemy targets within a 9x9 area around the self, excluding the inner 5x5 area. And so what that means is you take a 9x9 square, and then you have a 5x5 square. The 5x5 square around Peritya, she is not going to hit. She's hitting the outside area, so the outside 3 tiles of all that 9x9, or not 3, the outside 4 tiles. So everybody within those 4 tiles, not the inner 5x5. And so each target hit increases damage dealt by 5% up to 15%. So as long as you're hitting 3 enemies with that, you're going to get the maximum damage on this skill. Now, that is her kit without her duplicates, but let's go ahead and take a look at the dupes, because she is a dupe-reliant character, because it makes a lot of these work a lot better, especially building up the confectants cost, as well as reducing some other things here to make all these skills a lot better. So on the first one here, we have a fortification segment. On the first one, it's the number of buffs that can be cleansed is increased by 2. So right now, it cleanses only 1 buff on those enemies. You get that first dupe, and now you're going to cleanse 3 buffs from the enemy. So that's going to be really useful just for being a debuffer on the enemies, because a lot of the enemies will have multiple buffs. And so you're not only just making her a damage dealer, but now a debuffer with that. So we take a look at the second one down here on domain suppression. The effective range increased by 1 tile. So this one makes it so you can shoot 1 tile longer, so 9 on that. Nothing crazy with that, but having more range is always good. We have the third fortification segment over here. For each enemy target hit increases the additional damage dealt by 5% up to 25. So now, instead of 5 to 15, it's 5 to 25. So if you hit 5 enemies, you can get a 25% crit damage increase. And if you're using Peritya, you're going to be in those situations where you want to do AoE. And there's going to be those situations that arise in the game. And so you're basically going to generally be able to get that if you're using her in a AoE environment. Then we have the fourth one, and this one's pretty big. This fourth one's really big. The excluded area is reduced to 3x3. So now she'll hit even larger area, because originally it was you hit the 4 tiles outside of those 5x5. Now you're going to hit, since it's reduced to 3, it's going to be the outside 6. So it basically increases the amount of targets getting hit massively, because it's only a 3x3 around her that's not getting hit instead of the 5x5. So the fourth one is probably the biggest one, because it makes her ultimate significantly better. And then we get down to her passive. The 5th and 6th dupes are affecting the passive. But the 5th one, if no movement is made before performing an active attack, gain 2 points of confectants index after attacking. So this one will be really useful, because a lot of what you're going to probably want to do with her is, because her alt does so much AoE around her, and now that you already have 4 once you get the 5th one, so you're already increased the range dramatically there, is that you just get her into a place where she's kind of in the middle of the map, or in the middle of where all the enemies are, and you may not have to really move her at all at that point. If you're not having to move her at all, you're just going to be able to stack those confectants index points to make it much easier to just keep doing her alt, which has an expensive cost of 6. So this one will be really nice for trying to be able to spam her alts more often. And then the 6th one here, action support can be triggered an additional 4 times. And that's going to be really big, because you're just going to, when you're doing AoE fights that want you to have a lot of AoE damage, you're going to be doing that spam with like Kluke and some of the other AoE units that are going to come out in the future. And so being able to do it 10 times versus 6 is going to just be significantly more damage there. And that's with her 6th dupe. And then when we go ahead and take a look at her fixed keys and common keys here, we'll go through them from top down. So the first one here is temporary system maintenance. Gain 1 point of confectants index for every 10 points of stability damage dealt. And so she's doing a lot of AoE. The more enemies you hit, the more stability damage you're doing. So this one I see this one being extremely valuable on her, especially once you start getting your dupes up here, because you're needing 6 consistency indexes to do her alt. But her alt's going to be hitting a ton of enemies, and it's doing a stability damage of 2. And so if you hit 5 enemies with this, that's going to get you 1 point in confectants index right there, just from this key. So I see this one being a key one on her for a lot of situations. The second one here, impromptu cat and mouse game. If there is remaining mobility before attacking, gains movement up at the end of action for 1 turn. What's going to be really useful about this one is movement 2 gives additional 2 movement at the end of turn. And it lasts for 1 turn. What it'll be good for, and because this is another one you're probably going to want to have on her, is if you don't move to trigger that confectants index here from your dupes. If you don't move, it's going to give you a +2 move on the next turn, which makes it much easier to move on the next turn and still have some movement left over. Because the big thing she wants is she wants to have some of her movement left over to get that increased damage. And so by having move up 2, it makes it much easier to do that while still being able to move her around a little bit. So the third one here, automatic repair program. If no movement is made before attacking, cleanses 2 debuffs from self. So these can kind of go together. It depends. But this one I think will be extremely useful. It'll be more situational. I mean, you're going to want to pick it up, but it will be more situational if you're fighting a boss that does a lot of debuffing and you're in an AoE situation where you're going to be actually bringing her. Just putting this one on, she can cleanse. If you can just keep her still, she's going to be able to cleanse herself nice and easy. So your healer's not going to have to be the one dealing with that. So maybe they can help out a different one of your team members. So that one's going to be extremely useful, more situational, but it will be extremely useful in the situations that call for it. Lazy resistance increases damage dealt by active skill domain suppression to targets immune to displacement. So this one will just be useful because there's a lot of enemies that are going to be immune to displacement effects. So you're just going to get a 15% damage buff from that one. So that one can be quite useful just for a pure damage increase. Brief respite, gain 3 points of confectance index at the start of battle. And so these ones are nice because especially when they've been really nice in the beginning of the game where I'm just trying to get out there and just clear things really quickly. So it makes it much easier to trigger her ultimate right off the bat on a map. So it'll make it easier on some of the easier fights to just go right out there and throw your AoE and hope maybe just clear it or do a lot of damage real quickly. I don't know how useful that'll be in boss fights. I could see some value in it depending on the situation, but it is a more situational one. But definitely one you'll want to pick up eventually. And then a friendly contact increases stability damage dealt to the primary target by active skill fixed erosion by 4 points. So fixed erosion, this is one up here. So it goes from stability damage of 1 to 4. That is going to be absolutely huge, because you would definitely want to pair this key with this top one here, because you get 1 point of confectance index for every 10 points. While this one's doing a 3x3 grid, it's going to be pretty easy to hit 2, 3, or maybe even 4 enemies. I mean, even more. I mean, it's unlikely they're going to be in that large of or that tight together. But if you hit 2 or 3 enemies, you're easily getting another confectance point just from using that if you pair this one. So these two top ones, the top and bottom one here, will pair really well together. And then the other ones are all kind of situational along those two. I think these would be the main two that I would have most of the times. And then you just pick another one of these that kind of go alongside it depending on the scenario. And then you have our common key here, and it doesn't say it, but all the common keys have a stat boost that they give you. And so the common key she has is a 5% crit rate increase. And that's going to be huge regardless, because I found there's very few of the crit rate ones. QJ gives you a common key with 5% crit rate, and so she is another one that can give 5% crit rate. And since you can have 3 common keys, once you have 5 of those, you can just use those common keys just straight for getting 15% crit rate on a certain unit, without even taking into consideration the skills. Because I think that just having that crit rate itself is pretty good. But then when you go and look at what actual buff is here, all points to damage. If an active skill hits 2 or more enemy targets, damage dealt is increased by 7%. So 7% damage increase, but to me, the big point of it is the 5% crit that you get from it. Then we'll go ahead and take a look at her signature weapon. This is something you can get in the shop once you have enough of those tickets to get it. Now, I generally wouldn't use those tickets in the shop to buy for them, even though that's the only thing you can use them for right now. From what I have seen, you can eventually in the future, they add the option to trade those in for pulls. And so currently what I'm doing is I'm just holding on to those until I can pull for them. Get the pulls for actually pulling for limited units and limited weapons versus just getting the signature standard weapons. But you may pull this when you pull on the standard banner. So this is hers, Optical Illusion. It's an LMG. So the trait is if AoE damage dealt is dealt, apply 1 debuff for 1 turn. So another way to add a debuff to the enemy. If the target has 3 or more debuffs, this attack ignores 15% of their cover damage reduction. And so that won't be too hard to get with a lot of the units putting debuffs on enemies. It's situational there, but will be quite good for that impact. And then the effect of it is for each time an attack successfully hits 3, or well, Yeah, so it hits 3 targets with, this is 1 dupe. The last one's 2 dupe, or multiple dupes. So for every time it hits 3 targets, the damage of the next active skill is increased by 10% up to 20%, with an additional increase of 10% damage for AoE skills. After dealing damage, there is a 20% all the way up to 100% chance to apply 1 debuff to the target. And so you can kind of see 5 dupes on this actually makes it really, really good, because you got that 100% chance now to put 2 debuffs on them. But it's not going to be worth it to get that many of this signature weapon using those, because you're going to basically, once the pulls become available, if it's anything like other gotchas, this is going to be the equivalent of pulling 30 times on the limited if you use those tickets, which to me is never going to be worth it for a standard weapon. And so the last thing we can take a look at with her is going to be kind of how Pridewind reviews her. And so her big thing right now, her pros: can dispel buffs from enemies, can pull enemy targets closer to each other for easier AoE attacks, and great AoE damage potential. But she has a lot of cons. Now just note that all these cons are early game cons. Heavily dupe reliant, her best potential is locked behind the fortification segments. So over time, as you lose 50/50s, you may potentially start building up her dupes. You can get Peritya for free. That's the big thing. And so you can get her dupes for free as well. It's in the dispatch system. So even though she is dupe reliant, you are eventually going to get her dupes. Now, it's going to take a long time because it's dependent. It's a gotcha within the gotcha, but it's a free gotcha system. And so down the line, you're going to eventually start getting dupes of her. So when Clue K comes out, which may be 6 months to a year from now, you probably will already have hopefully gotten a couple dupes of her through that system. It takes longer to charge her ultimate, unlike other T-Dolls, and has a high confectance index cost. Her ultimate skills also require to be in the middle of a large group of enemies, making a high risk, high reward skill. And I mean, that's kind of what I was saying on the other one. Her big thing is you got to get her in position where she's in the middle, and then you really don't want to move her because a lot of her damage potential's locked behind her having some movement left over. But if you looked at the keys and the dupes, those kind of can take care of that high confectance cost as long as you're hitting a lot of enemies within your AoEs. I mean, you're not going to want to bring her to battles where you don't want to do AoE. So she's always going to be a situational unit. But the situations where she's good, she's going to be really good because of that. Requires level 30 plus to become stronger, as her strongest neural healings are locked behind her higher levels. Those are the ones we were already looking at. And I mean, at this point, getting level 30 is nothing. I'm already level 30 in the game, and it's been a few days. So to me, that's not a con. I mean, just push to level 30, not a big deal. The beginning of the game hasn't been hard enough to really care that she's not the best of the best right now anyway. So that's not really a con at all. Low damage on her basic attack, which lowers her effectiveness with action support. But her action support is AoE and does a significant amount of damage. But yeah, it is a little bit lower damage than some of the other action supports. That's not her, like, I wouldn't make that her core. Like, she's not like QJ where she's just completely reliant on that being her main damage potential. So yeah, it's a little bit lower there, but nothing too crazy. Action support also requires allied units AoE attacks to trigger, and that's what I mentioned. So she wants AoE units to work with. Clue K is going to be the main one that I know of. I don't know of the other AoE units that are coming out, but Clue K is the most broken of the AoE units, and Peritya is going to pair extremely well with her once she comes out. Her best partners in it mentions it right here. Clue K and Meki are not available. Well, I didn't even see that, but yeah, that's the main thing. The main ones she goes with are not available, but once they are, she's going to be extremely good. And then, due to her AoE nature, she struggles in boss content. Yes, she's AoE. She's not a boss killer, so you're not going to use her on like the boss run or any of those things. But there is other content in the game, in the events, as well as other little things here and there that are difficult, but they're not bosses. But there's a lot of enemies, and you're needing to kill those enemies, and you can't. Your single target damage dealers like QJ, who is really good at killing single targets, are not going to be good in them, and you're going to want people that can do AoE damage, and that's where she's going to be useful. So some of the best units on the single target are going to be useless on the ones where you're getting spammed with enemies that you need to clear out, especially if they're really tanky. So she struggles in boss content, but she's going to be extremely good in AoE content, especially when she gets her best teammates that she synergizes with. And so that is kind of my thoughts on her. So if we go back into the game here, you can kind of see what she looks like. You actually watch a video on her. When you're looking at the units, they actually have like a little promotional video on them within the game. But yeah, looks really cool. And a lot of her skills, when you look at it in games, looks pretty good. So I definitely am excited to be able to get her here in the future. And for those who want to know how you do get her, just for that, it is actually in the... It's in the public area. So when you're doing these dispatches, which you want to make sure you always have these running, because when you earn these, you're getting these little tokens, these wishing coins. And that is where you can use them under dispatch income for this mystery box. And this mystery box is a gacha system that has a very low chance, but a chance to get you Peritya. And this is where you can be able to get your dupes. And so everybody should be able to will get her. As long as you play, or you're playing daily, you're doing your dispatches, you're going to eventually get a Peritya copy. And so we'll go back to her. When one last thing on there is, let's see. And if you actually wanted to look at your skills for the unit yourself, you can actually just go into that, click details, and then click them. And that's where it'll pull them up right here. And so you can see the common key down here. It has that crit rate 5% on her common key. But yeah, that pretty much covers her. Great unit. Yeah, not the best at the beginning of the game, but right now nothing's hard enough that you can't complete it with her. But yeah, if you like my content, if you could like, comment, and subscribe, it really helps. And thanks for watching.